Bobby Fischer sacrifices his knight against Viktor Korchnoi, which leads to an unplayable position for Viktor Korchnoi, and he had to resign the game. So let's go ahead and watch how Bobby Fischer does this. So Victor is playing with the white pieces here, and Bobby Fischer is playing with the black pieces. So we just start with the Queen's Gambit, and Bobby basically defends it with the King's Indian defense, that is shooting this bishop into this particular G7, and because of that G6 was played earlier, and he will castle on the king side as well. So after d6, the bishop to e2 by Victor, who is playing with the white pieces, and Fischer castles as of the fifth move, and knight to f3, getting ready to castle on the king side as well, Victor. So e5 by Fischer, immediately attacking the central pawn control of Victor with this queen's gambit. He played e4 with the queen's gambit as well. So Bobby is basically trying to attack the particular pawn structure, because later on you'll also be getting this b4 and a4 pawns marching down the board. So trying to get some counterplay going. So after that, Victor just goes for the castling, and knight to c6 is played, and d5 is played, pushing the knight away to e7, and knight to d2 by Victor now. So c5 is played by Fischer with the intent of countering the threat of playing this b4 and a4 later on in the game. So now you cannot play this b4 mode directly. White cannot play that. So instead he plays a3, which allows the pushing of the b4 pawn. So the knight now comes to e8, and now b4 is played by Victor, and the pawn is pushed to b6, protecting this pawn over here, which prevents these pawns from passing into the black's area. And if the pawn is captured, you can capture back, and the b file will be opened. So the rook comes to b1, and now f5 by Fischer, and basically he's looking to create attack on the king side of Victor, on the flank side. So with the pushing of the f5 pawn, and after that the f3 is played by Victor, but it was better to push the pawn on the queen side to a4, trying to create a counter attack on the queen side. This allows Fischer to push the pawn to a4, not going for the capture, opening up this line for the rooks. And a4 now is played by Victor, and the pawn pushed to g5 by Fischer now. So he's basically his king is pretty much safe here with all the pieces around, minor pieces around the king. And so he's pushing the pawns, and now a5 by Victor, looking for the counterplay on the queen side. So now the pawn get captured, the b pawn takes the c5 pawn, and the pawns get captured back. So later on in the game, Korchnoi Victor basically said that this was a mistake because it deactivates his queen side, and even though this rook is on this open b file, it is pretty well countered by the queen, the bishop, and the rook over here. So nothing much to do basically. And after the knight to b3 move, supporting this pawn over here, which was undefended, and the queen could have captured it, it also blocks the way for other pieces to come in through this open b file as well. So the rook now goes to g6, and the bishop to f6, connecting the rooks and the queen on the back rank, on the first rank. And the knight to f6 now is played, and even he could have played this h5 move and go for an all-out pawn march on the king side, but Fischer played f6, and king now moves to h1. Even now he could play h5, and Fischer first moves g4, and here you have to capture this pawn. Otherwise, if this pawn is allowed to push forward, it attacks this particular pawn, and you'll have to push this pawn. But if you push this pawn, the bishop can capture the pawn, and maybe you can just double up. I'll just show you this later on. You can just bring your queen here, sacrifice, bring your knight over here, sacrifice, and maybe probably the game will be over with the rook over here. So after the pawn is captured, the knight jumps and captures the pawn, and the rook now comes to f3 basically. But it was better to bring your bishop over here, which would have protected this pawn, and also this creates this nice little pawn structure intact, creating defending the pressure nicely. So rook to h6 by Fischer, and h3 by Victor, now pushing the knight away. So instead of pushing the knight, because this pawn here is pinned, you cannot capture this knight right now because of the presence of the king here. So the knight now jumps to g6 by Fischer. So the king now moves away. Now this knight needs to move here, otherwise it will be captured. So the knight retreats to f6, and the rook and the bishop now comes to e1, guarding this particular square, preventing the knight from coming here and going for the exchange. And now knight to h8 by Fischer. So Normally we don't move the knights back, but this maneuver is to place the knight in an attacking position. So after the rook goes to d3, the knight comes to f7, and the bishop now comes to f3, supporting the pawn structure. And now the knight comes to g5. So basically, this knight jumped from here to here, and now to here back. So the reorienting of the knight allows this puts pressure on this particular pawn, which is actually defending the king over here. And queen comes to e2, trying to defend the king, and the rook to g6 by Fischer. And now the king again moves to f1, sensing the danger. And basically Fischer goes for the sacrifice of the knight. And so once the knight get captured, the bishop captures with the check. So for that knight, you got these two important king side pawns, and also this king is pretty much undefended with all the pieces on the queen side. And it's a very less defended king. And after the knight now jumps to g4 with a check, and the bishop now captures, and the bishop captures back. So here there is a double threat on the queen is under attack and it needs to move, and also the queen of Fischer could jump in here and create a check, and there is a lot of attacking combination on it. So there is no good way for Viktor to counter this particular double threat after this particular knight sacrifice. And so basically, I think as of this position, 32 moves. So he basically captured the bishop back, and after that he basically just resigned the game. So so as you can see, all the pieces of white are stuck on the queen side, not doing anything, and only the bishop here is doing something like a defensive job over here. So that was the game basically. And basically just Fischer just outplayed with his tactics, Victor with his tactics, who's a pretty good player. He played Anatoly Karpov in the world champ. He played against, they were the they played against each other in the world championship match. So that's the match, and Fischer won the match. There was no reply for Victor, so he basically just resigned the game. So thanks very much for watching. We'll be back with more such videos.